All right. Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to the Connected Car and Smart Cities panel discussion. But we're mostly going to be talking about connected cars, self-driving cars, and AIs, and how that impacts society and potentially benefits all of us. My name is Ajay Ramachandran. I'm a managing partner at Boot Up Capital. We are a venture capital fund based in Menlo Park. And we also have a accelerator that is based in Menlo Park as well that works with really early stage companies. I'm going to let my panel introduce themselves, but they're all esteemed members of the VC and or entrepreneurial startup community. So Nadav, why don't you kick it off?
Hi, I'm Nadav Aharoni. I'm currently Senior Director of Product Management at Next EV, which is a relatively new autonomous and electric car company based in sort of split between China and here.
Hi there, I'm Mark Platchon. People know me as the BMW guy. I built BMW's corporate venture fund here in the Valley for the last 5 years, and now I'm setting up a new multi-corporate venture fund called the Autonomous World Fund to invest in exactly the things this sector is all about. I've invested in Tesla and Peloton and Nauto and ZenDrive and things like that.
I'm Ido Sarig. I'm the General Manager of IoT Solutions at Wind River, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Intel, doing a fair amount of actual work in connected vehicle, things like autonomous driving, providing the basic building blocks for autonomous driving systems, from embedded real-time operating systems for MCUs, all the way up the stack to connected cars, over-the-air updates, infotainment systems, and so on.
Hey, I'm Igal Elbaz. I'm the Vice President for Ecosystem and Innovation at AT&T. I run a network of 6 innovation centers that we call AT&T Foundry here in Palo Alto, Israel, 2 in Plano, Texas, Atlanta, and Houston. Our charter is to help companies, startups, and technologies to get integrated into AT&T. Our connection into the topic is we've done and we're doing a lot of work around smart cities, connected cars, electric vehicles, all kind of work around this, and obviously our network is what's enabling a lot of this.
My name is Christopher Heiser. I'm CEO of Renovo. We are a software company that focuses on autonomous and the ecosystem that is necessary to bring autonomy, full level 5, sorry, I said level 5 already, completely autonomous vehicles to market within my lifetime, and hopefully faster.
Well, thanks everyone for joining us. Just by a show of hands, I'm curious to see how many of you in the audience are actually part of or somehow connected to the connected car or autonomous car space. Okay. Oh, it's a pretty good show of hands. So it's probably not that bad that, Chris, that you mentioned level 5 then. We will kind of go between, high-level topics and maybe for the folks that are in the audience that are actually from the space, delve into some of the technical topics as well, since there are quite a few of you here from the industry. So to kick things off, I thought we would have each of the panelists just describe a little bit about their own businesses and what they're specifically doing in the connected car space.
So I'm actually coming to Next TV from Google and from consumer, both apps and platforms and the mobile world. And at Next TV, and generally, one of the reasons I'm passionate about this space is now that we know how to build the electric vehicles and the autonomy and the sensors are going to become almost commodity, the next generation of vehicles is going to be about the user experience, the product, the whole interface of the user in the car through the lifetime of the user. And that's pretty exciting space for us.
Hi there. I'm spending a lot of my time thinking about and investing in, I guess, what I call the ecosystem around the car more than the car itself. There's a lot of folks working on the right sensors and sensor fusion and deep learning and all that stuff that goes in the car. But maybe even the more interesting part is how does that change society? How does it change healthcare? Has it changed insurance? Has it changed retail, warehousing, logistics, freight, trucking, sort of everything you think about, the way cities are designed with parking and roads and everything is going to be reinvented when mobility goes from $1.50 a mile to 30 cents a mile. The economy is driven by, basically by, the more people can move and the more goods can move, the more you boost the economy. So this whole autonomous revolution is going to boost the economy in ways we can't even imagine.
Okay, I'll try to not make this too much of a product pitch, but you did ask about what we're doing. So Wind River has a suite of products branded under the name of the Helix chassis, which covers 3 distinct areas of connected car and autonomous driving. At the very basis of it are the building blocks that go into the actual autonomous driving and assisted driving components of the car, whether it's the real-time operating system, which has been scaled down considerably to run in very resource-constrained 32-bit MCUs and perhaps even lower. The second layer is data management for the car, which is an essential part of connected vehicle. How do you continuously maintain, upgrade, update the software that runs on the car, both the safety critical components of it as well as the more infotainment type stuff. And the third piece is instrument clusters. And actually something that might not be very apparent to those of you who are not part of the industry, one of the mundane yet difficult challenges that the automotive industry faces today is that with the amount of components that are digital and need to be connected, there's actually not enough space underneath the hood to run all the cables in the car. And that's where Wind River's previous experience in doing things like this for consolidation in airborne platforms, making multiple systems run on the same piece of hardware, a very similar process is happening today in the connected vehicle, and that's the third piece of the chassis.
So both connected car and smart cities requires connectivity. That's a basic foundation for this. Connected car is a business that we do for 6-7 years by now. I think if any of you drive a connected car, there's 80 or 90% that you drive an AT&T connected car to our LTE network. There's about 10 million cars already on the road that are connected to our network. There's about 20 car manufacturers, just name few, GM, Ford, BMW, Tesla, and others that are using us. Smart cities is another business for us that, through integration and partnership with startups and established companies, we're going to cities and trying to tell the story of what is a smart city, what can the citizens can benefit from, and what kind of services we can offer. And as we look at the future into autonomous cars, it's an interesting era because for many evolutions of the networks, usually what happened is that, the operator would come with a new, 3G, then LTE. Not always people could understand what could be the benefit of this. I feel that 5G, for the first time, the industry, such as autonomous cars, is waiting for this enabler because that's going to be a key enabler for this to happen. So it's an interesting, where many companies and car manufacturers are waiting for this revolution of the network to enable all of those new industries that people are talking about here.
So usually I get to say this in front of a big automaker, but not this time. Maybe next of you will be big soon. But today's car that you buy is a platform that has taken a very long time to evolve to where it is. And even the newest technologies take an extremely long amount of time to get onto the car. And those car companies see a platform that they have invested in, and they're going to incrementally add functionality to that. And they're going to add that functionality at the high end of their market and then go down. And if you look at any major market, that's the way that these companies operate. So what that means is unless you can afford a Tesla Model S, you're not going to see this type of technology in the car that you buy for a significant amount of time. The sensor prices will come down, the computation will come down, but it's not going to be in the next 2 or 3 years. There's a different class of vehicle that's being designed around mobility as a service, where the cost of the vehicle can be shared, where the depreciation can be handled differently than you and I owning it. And those vehicles can be architected not quite clean sheet, but much closer to a clean sheet design, and they can be focused on a very specific use case, which is mobility and generally urban mobility. So that is a very different discipline than what Audi and GM and Lexus are doing to their, and Toyota are doing to their product lines. This case of the vehicle in the city that will take you and everyone else around, that's what we're focused on. We're focused on fully autonomous vehicles that are shared, they're connected, they are almost certainly electric, they're more efficient, they're better for the cities, they will allow a lot of things that Mark is talking about to happen. So it's a focused approach for us, but we think ultimately that will be the product that disrupts. And we look at 2007, we were talking just a moment ago. In 2007, Nokia shipped 140 million candy bar phones, and Apple shipped 0. And about 4 years later, it was exactly the opposite. So things in this space can change quite quickly. Maybe not that fast in automotive, but we hope pretty fast.
Well, that's a great segue into some of the next topics here. You know, connected cars hold great promise. Many of you are probably familiar with the the regulatory guidelines from the DOT from September with their 15-point safety guidelines for the connected car industry that state-level lawmakers are now starting to adopt. And a big reason for why connected car and governments are pushing the adoption of this technology are the potential health and safety benefits and sustainability benefits of connected transportation. You know, 34,000, I think in 2014, there were 34,000 deaths from traffic accidents that were the result of human error. And that's a pretty terrifying statistic. It equals the number of deaths from gun shootings. You have also tremendous opportunities for productivity with self-driving cars, the reduction in urban congestion. 70% of the world's population in about 20 to 30 years are going to be in urban centers, in the top 600 urban centers. So there's a tremendous challenge ahead, and connected transportation has to rise to the occasion to solve all of that. But with that said, Chris was bringing up some interesting thoughts about the future of the automotive industry and how some of the legacy manufacturers and players may not adapt and even be in business potentially in 10 years, in the same vein that Nokia suffered a terrible fate at the hands of Apple. So I'm going to have the panel provide their view, their version of the future. What does the world look like in 10 or 20 years, in the near future, with connected cars and smart cities? And what can we expect? Benefits or otherwise?
Okay, so I'm always the first, so I have to.
That's all right.
You can always correct everything I say afterwards. But also, I think one interesting thing, first of all, about predictions is the prediction of when we will have those fully autonomous cars. And if you ask Elon Musk, it might be in 2 or 3 years. If you ask others, it could be in 15, 20, maybe 30 years.
Well,
And
Ford
so
announced very boldly that the level 5 self-driving autonomous car is going to hit the roads in 2021. So
that's great.
if we believe that, it's right around the corner.
And so the potential is amazing, right? I think there was an Atlantic article about how the autonomous industry could be the best health improvement of the century compared to cancer treatments and the anti-smoking initiatives. And just in the number of fatalities that could be saved. And the productivity, I think people usually spend today about 50 minutes in commute that could be added to the economy, change the whole media industry and what it is. And in the 20-year frame, when we have enough cars on the road, then you can start getting both dynamic congestion controls and traffic reduction, while at the same time, cities themselves will be changing. People will choose differently of where to live, because I don't care now to buy a cheaper house 2 hours away when I can use those for actual work. than buy something really close to work so I can spend more time with my family in the other time. So, I'll let you talk about some of the other changes, but I'm very excited about this potential.
As much as people talk about people moving, I want to talk about goods moving for a little bit. A mall is a small building surrounded by very large parking lots. And when you actually think about it, a mall isn't just stores. It's a combination of the store and the warehouse, because all the goods are sitting out on racks. And, there's 23, 44 longs lined up there, or blue dresses. And then she says, well, if it's not, you can't find it here, I'll go in the back and look and see what we got. It's like the store will be a place where you can touch and feel and try it on with some kind of experience. And then when you buy, you don't carry it out to that giant parking lot. The on-demand Uber or whatever it is picks you up at a ramp and takes you where you're going, but the goods get delivered to your house before you ever get there. If you're flying an airplane, you won't drag a bag and stick it in the overhead. You leave it on your step, it'll be at your destination when you get there. Because freight and delivery are going to be omnipresent, everywhere, instantaneous, and almost free.
So I want to talk about several aspects of this. First of all, I think the question is not so much will people be willing to move and live further away from where they work because they can get the work done in their self-driving car. That's undoubtedly going to be true. But I think a bigger question is, will people even own cars? If the autonomous car becomes ubiquitous and accessible in terms of cost, why would you want to own your own car? And I think part of the discussion about which OEMs are going to be around in 10 years or 20 years is due to the fact that there's going to be a significant reduction in just the number of cars that are being made, and there's not going to be enough to go around. That's one aspect. The second one that is always puzzling to me is the public's concern about the perceived safety or lack thereof of autonomous driving cars. You look at the recent hoopla in the media about the Tesla accident. That was one accident that is probably due to some bad software. That's one accident, which wasn't even a fatality. As you said, there's 40,000 of these, but nobody's going around saying, hey, we should limit people's ability to drive. We should make driving lessons much more stringent. We should test people throughout their driving careers to make sure that their skills are still there. We just accept the fact that 40,000 people a year will die from traffic accidents. And yet one autonomous driving accident sends everybody into a frenzy. And the third part I want to touch upon is just the time horizon. It's one thing for Ford to say by 2020 or whatever, the autonomous driving car will be here. I think in terms of technology, the technology is already here. If you want to see a self-driving car, it's right now. What's going to take a longer time is for the regulatory environment to be in place to enable this to become the default mode of transportation. I don't see that happening in 10 years. That's probably at least 20 years out.
Well, just a comment on those 3 points, starting with the last in terms of the regulatory environment. I think it's the regulatory environment plus consumer kind of readiness and willingness to even entertain the idea of self-driving cars. A lot of recent polls and studies have consumers decidedly against the idea of self-driving cars. We live in a little microcosm where we all want it and we can't wait for it.
But that's, the surveying is how you ask the question, right?
Sure.
Do you want to buy your 16-year-old daughter a car that can crash or a car that can't crash? You get totally different answers.
No, but
Good
I think
point.
the point is
If
that
you're 80
most
and
of
you
the
wanna buy
people in
your
the
seat-
US don't own a Tesla. This is a Silicon Valley thing, right? Most of the people don't own a Tesla. The only news that they ever got about Tesla is these accidents. For
Right.
them, autonomous car is not safe. There's one accident. That's 100%. So
Right.
this is how people think about this. It's going to take time. There's no doubt
It will
about
take
this.
time
It's-
to change consumer behavior and their demand for this kind of technology. It'll mount over time. Consumers are willing to go along for the
I
ride
don't
if
know.
it's a superior option.
I went to the hearings when California had the hearings for the DOT rules and regs and all that. And there was a line out the door of people who wanted to comment. You know what? They were all carrying weight canes, and they were elderly,
And they wanted
and they
a
were in
self-driving car.
wheelchairs, and they wanted mobility now.
Yeah. Well, that's a great point. So societally, self-driving cars can impact a lot of segments of the population that are currently immobile because they just can't drive. And self-driving cars kind of open up the potential productivity and health and happiness of a large segment of our society that's excluded right now from mobility, which is a pretty fundamental kind of need and almost inalienable human right in the United States. But touching on the other 2 points that you brought up, just very briefly, if people don't own cars, it changes everything. Mark was talking about a lot of other societal impacts from retail to insurance. We're already seeing companies like Metro Mile come up that have fractional insurance, insurance that you pay for on demand as you need it, literally for every mile that you drive. And so there are a lot of changes underway already that are kind of happening right before us, and we're laying the groundwork for a lot of these phenomenal changes.
So,
Yigal.
yes, 3 quick points. So, first of all, I want to touch to your point about 60% of the population is going to be in mega cities by 2030. I think the implication of this is 2 things. Either it's going to be a chaos, unmanageable, or they're going to add intelligence between vehicles, the infrastructure, the city, the policy, all of this that's going to make it happen. Otherwise, just going to be some of the cities today in the third world, which is a complete chaos. The other thing is the in-car experience, which some of this is already exists today, but imagine a complete new world, right? Where you don't even have to look at the road. You can sit with your family in kind of a living room-like experience, and the amount of media that you can consume, and even at work, you can do video conference and all kind of things that you couldn't even imagine today. I was just recently with my family, we've done the road to Hana, in Maui, and we had this app on the phone that talked to us all day long. What about all of us wearing goggles or having this person on a large screen inside the car talking to us and tell us what's going, like a private guide, right? Because we don't have to worry about the road. The third thing, which is the behavior thing, is going to take time. Remember this, like I think every person, there's 2 things. We want to get married and we want to have a driving license, right? So these are the 2 things that when we're kids, we want to do. We're not going to drive. This is like a huge behavior change for a lot of us. Some of us, including myself, I get emotional with my car. So there's a lot of changes that we don't even can imagine how people are going to respond to this. It's going to be very interesting to see how it's going to work.
Absolutely. It's interesting with AT&T and Time Warner's merger. It really provides some incredible potential for entertainment and infotainment inside of the self-driving car.
Unfortunately, I can't talk about this, but you can imagine what can happen with this integration.
Yes. Yeah, well, we were talking about watching new episodes of Games of Thrones while you're driving around in your self-driving car. But I think Yigal brings up an interesting point about all of the new interfaces that are starting to develop inside of the self-driving car, from AR and VR systems, heads-up displays, voice interaction, gestural controls, all new ways of interacting while you're in the vehicle, and especially in a level 5 self-driving car, which is fully autonomous and no steering wheel, which is what Ford announced earlier this year for a planned release in 2021, a car that will have no steering wheel, and then fundamentally does change the experience for the passenger, where you have a lot of free time on your hands. We were talking earlier about how you might plan your commute based on the latest episode of Big Bang Theory. You want to watch a 21-minute episode of Big Bang Theory? You program the episode in and say, Waze, route me based on my episode. I want to watch the whole show before I arrive. The world will change very quickly.
So that experience is a really good example of why the car companies are going to struggle to deliver that. how many of you got into a brand new car, maybe one you bought, or you're in the showroom and you're looking at the display, and you look at it and you're like, that kind of looks like it's already 3 years old. You know, my Retina display looks better than this on my laptop. My cell phone looks brighter than the gauge cluster. That's because it is better and it is brighter. Because the components that go into the cars take about 3 years, maybe as long as 5, to get from a product ideation through development, through certification and testing. So your brand new Audi is 5 years old. Best case scenario. Tesla pushes the envelope, but even those guys, the K1s and the chips that are inside of the Tesla, those are 2.5-year-old technology from NVIDIA. In your pocket and in your laptop, that stuff is less than 12 months old. When you have a car that doesn't have a steering wheel, they don't have to go through the same certification. The reason why it takes 5 years to have your gauge cluster go through is that if it fails, you crash, and then it's Audi's fault. But if you're watching Game of Thrones, the threshold for what that thing can do is a lot lower. It can blink out, it can have problems, they can replace it every week or month. It feels more like a laptop or a cell phone. That experience is different, and it's why BMW and Toyota and GM and Ford are not going to have the DNA to build this thing the way that someone that comes from outside the industry will. They will be able to build a much better experience for you, and you'll like that better because they won't think about it the way that an automotive manufacturer thinks about delivering technology to market.
Can I add a depressing point?
Sure, please.
Okay, good. So not everything is. So remember Ford 100 years ago, whenever said all of the cars going to be black, right? All going to be the same. So are we going back in time and, you know, because of all of the time sharing and people not going to buy cars, so why would the car manufacturer is going to invest in 25 different models because people are going to pay more because how the car looks like if it's just taking me from one place to another? So that might be something that might happen.
It definitely will happen, but it's not necessarily a bad idea. I don't think they're going to be 25 different models per vendor, and there are not going to be that many vendors to begin with. Look at what we have today with mass transportation, which I think is pretty much the model that the car will follow. You have, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 maybe manufacturers of trains, and you don't really care what the train looks like, at least not on the outside. You might have a preference as a passenger for this type of seat or that type of seat, but you don't go, and to Chris's point earlier, you don't go and inspect the sheet metal of the car to see if it's really close together. You just want to get from point A to point B, and for most of the cars, that's the way it's going to be. But for people like you, who get emotional about the driving, which, by the way, I'd happy not to have you on the road, there will be special places where you could still get emotional. Just like, think about the transition that humanity went through when the horseless carriage came about. At that time, most people had horses, and some of them enjoyed riding the horses. The horses didn't go away. There's a very small segment of the market of horse enthusiasts today that enjoy riding horses, and they've got horse farms tucked away somewhere where you could go and you could either own or rent or timeshare a horse, and when the mood strikes you and you want to go riding, yeah, you'll go riding in the hills, but you're not riding it on city streets, and the same thing will happen with cars.
Well, you know, I don't know that the cars have to be as depressing, Yigal, as you describe. You know, Model T kind of cars, all black, one, you know, form factor for all. I think there will be a lot of variety, but meeting specific types of use cases. I think it was Mark that was bringing up the idea of multiple format cars, from sleeper cars to, you know, commute cars, to a wide variety of other form factors, you know, where you might want to have, exercise equipment in your car, or entertainment system in center in your car, like a family room for the family drives. So there are a lot of form factors that I think we're going to see that will change the very definition of what a car actually means. A lot of car designers are starting to theorize that cars are going to be an extension of the family room experience. And as far as the black color of the car, there are paramagnetic paints and nano metallic paints now that can change color based on your mood. I think BMW, Mini, and Bugatti have all released concept cars that actually do change color based on how you're feeling or how you want to change, the look of your vehicle. So I think that's an exciting future where you can personalize the whole experience. But coming back to the this notion of public safety and security, we talked a little bit about how that might be a real inhibitor or a challenge for the adoption of self-driving and autonomic vehicles. The recent guidelines from the federal government in 2 of the 15 kind of safety, or I should say 2 of the 15 guidelines, were centered around, I think, ideas that are really important to consumers, one of which is the ethical computing or the ethical considerations of the vehicle itself. How does the car make decisions around safety of passengers, fellow commuters, and pedestrians? And how is the AI going to make the tough call when it's choosing between bad alternatives? Crashing the passenger into a tree in order to avoid the school bus or the mom in the stroller. How does the car decide? Who's making that call ultimately? Who's writing that algorithm that makes the final choice? And so I think there are a lot of ethical implications in this future AI world. I'd love to have all of you comment on that and your level of worry or confidence that these challenges can be resolved.
So I think Mark mentioned it in the earlier conversation, how there's definitely a transition period of people getting used to this idea. But today already we make those choices ourselves as drivers.
Right.
Your Uber driver or your taxi driver makes those decisions as well as you're riding in the back seat. And we definitely have to address this with some algorithms from decision, whether it's just more the science fiction type of decisions of creating specific laws or dealing with the situation as it is. Another interesting aspect is when that crash happens, who goes to jail? What happens? Does the software programmer who made a bug, does he need to go to court? Or does the company have to answer for it? Is it the situation? I think there are going to be a lot of new legal books and written about this kind of new world.
I may be off on this, but I'm a lot less worried about cybersecurity or the ethics of the car. My concerns are if cars can run around by themselves, right? You can send your car off to the maintenance shop. You can send it off to the parking lot, to the charging station. You can also send it somewhere loaded with a bomb. So an autonomous car becomes a bomb delivery robot. And that's really scary. And we have no ability to figure out what's been loaded in the car, what's sitting in the trunk, and where it's going.
Well, and we're already seeing, various terror organizations use drones in a similar capacity to deliver destruction. So those are worries and concerns for sure. And perhaps kind of more on the bad actor side of that industry as it emerges. But coming back to kind of the core of the AI, Mark, I'm going to keep you on point on this one. Worried about the AI, or hey, turn over my entire drive to the AI.
We talked about this the other day, and somebody said, who's going to direct their programmer to make that decision of, you kill the stroller, you kill the other one, and it's like, fine, use a random number generator, we'll alternate. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I'm not as worried about the AI either, but I'm honestly not that worried about the car being used as a bomb delivery drone or robot, because to me that's not that different from what we have today. There's no shortage of people apparently who are willing to sacrifice their own lives as suicide bombers driving cars and exploding them today. So fundamentally nothing changes.
Well, no, a lot changes because now you can just send the bomb. You don't have to kill yourself. You can send the bomb.
So you have a slightly larger supply of potential bombs, but are you under the impression that that the thing that's keeping them at bay today is the fact that there's not that many?
No.
I don't think so. And the same mechanisms that are used to control those will be used to figure out who are the people that are programming.
They're going to be enough sensors in the
But
city
you're
to
not on
identify.
the A. Yeah, maybe there could be sensors to prevent that from
On
happening.
the AI side, look, I think you in our prep talk, you brought up Asimov's and the 3 basic laws of robotics, and I think yes, there's going to be some variant of that implemented such that the primary responsibility is going to be on the autonomous car to not injure or harm its driver and its passenger.
or humans in general.
That's actually an interesting question. Maybe if you could pay more, you could afford to get a car that was programmed to protect you first and foremost, and those that don't have enough money will be driving in a car that's going to be programmed to care about other people more. It's not different. You asked, are we going to be in a place where if you can afford to, you will get better autonomous driving? Absolutely you will. Just like today, if you can afford to pay more, you can ride on the HOV lane during rush hour, and if you can't, then you're stuck in traffic. It's just going to take it one level higher.
Right, so rate metering becomes a big opportunity, right, where you pay a little bit more, and instead of Waze optimizing everyone's routes, it's going to optimize your route differently if you can pay for it, right? Pay for a slightly faster route on the way to work.
I'm not worried about the AI, but I think that until we're going to AI the government, that's going to be a very regulated industry. I don't think it's going to be at the hand of the car manufacturer to decide. Some of them are already made public statement about this, but I think as this is going to develop and going to be more cars out there, I think that's going to be a very regulated market. People on the government who have an extreme voice about how this is going to work and how cars are going to have to behave, and they're going to have to obey to this.
I'll jump in about, I think even part of the recent guidelines from the federal government, one of the instructions is not what to do, but that the car manufacturer has to disclose the rules. And it's very interesting in today's AI world, because many times, especially when we're talking about things like deep learning and fuzzy kind of networks, it's hard for even to understand why the decision was made. So there'll have to be even strides in AI and in understanding AI and AI decisions across the board, cars and in other places, so people can trust more of the logic and the reasoning of that black box.
Yeah, and I think what Nadav said earlier about the law, I think it's an important observation that as a society, generally, globally, personal accountability is a really important part of law. And I think you can convince someone that robots will get smart enough to classify objects, react faster than humans, that Deep Blue beat Kasparov in 1997. The car will beat the driver. We're doing research with Stanford, and the cars we do already drive better than human drivers in certain circumstances. That's a solved problem. Maybe not today, but within the next few years. The problem is that when someone gets into an accident, they go before a judge, and you get to hear their story, and you get to hear them talk about why they made the decision. And there's something extremely important in the human closure about grief and loss to hear someone explain why they did what they did. And maybe you'll disagree with it, maybe you'll find it comforting, but it's there. There's some rationale. They describe the event. That doesn't happen with AI. Like when we were talking about it, there's this sort of weird pall that comes over the audience when you say, oh, the robot shows who to kill. There's something deeply hollow about that. And until AI becomes more accessible and we can understand the mind of robots in some way that makes it human, we're going to be having this conversation over and over and over again, because there's nothing comforting or personally responsible about a robot deciding to take a life. And that will be that way for a long time. And so you have the opportunity to launch products in places where this is going to be as rare as possible and get user acceptance. That's why Google drives at 20 miles an hour in cute little clown-shaped cars, because they're very non-threatening and people like them and aren't afraid of them and don't dive out of their way. And that's what's going to continue to happen, is you're going to try and get people to trust these systems and to minimize the number of times that a judge has to point at an empty chair and ask, why did the algorithm do what the algorithm did? There's no good answer to this today. It's a very, very challenging problem. It's a very human problem.
I'm going to jump in again because your example with Google's cars is very interesting because people actually jump in front of them in the street today to see if they stop. And I think Audi or some other maker said that their first autonomous version of a car will not indicate that it's autonomous because they're afraid of drivers abusing the behavior of the car and basically taking over the road and cutting it off. So that's another interesting thing about this transition. We can imagine let's say just to be safe, 50 years, everything will be autonomous. Maybe we'll have all uniform forms of the car and where we are today. And the transition is going to be very interesting because it's going to start with transitioning between driving and not, and being autonomous. It's going to be about being autonomous on certain roads and not others. And how do the users understand that now they actually still have to pay attention versus when they can actually watch a movie? And that's a lot of interesting thing that all of us in the industry today, and maybe 20 years or it'll take, to deal with and form the future that will be in 50 years.
And I think, and I totally agree into what Mark was saying earlier about the line of people at the DOT NHTSA who are looking for autonomy. There are people today that would love to have autonomous vehicles. They may be 0.1% of the population, they may be 30, but I still remember my first Uber drive and just how weird that was, calling someone and they drove up and picked me, and now I don't even think about it. And there's going to be a class of people that embrace this technology and will learn from that, and it will not be a completely smooth process. But Uber is an economic argument. People are taking advantage of the economics of the situation, and an autonomous car, if you play it forward far enough, is cheaper per mile than a human-driven car. That's an economic argument that people will take advantage of, and watching that evolve over the coming years is going to be fascinating.
Absolutely. Well, switching gears a moment, why don't we spend the last couple minutes of our panel on something that's probably relevant to a lot of the folks in the audience that are entrepreneurs, that are thinking about this industry, or maybe already have startups in this industry. The industry being connected cars and/or the related smart city industry. And let's spend a moment just talking about where, what are the best approaches for entrepreneurs to get engaged in this market? Because historically, it's been a market dominated by large automotive brands and manufacturers that have really long product planning and production cycles that span many years, and are often longer range kind of product development life cycles than the average startup has to runway to stay in business. So how does one get going in this industry? Where can you begin? And I'm going to ask Mark to kick it off because of his unique vantage point from BMW.
You find a very rich Chinese guy and get a lot of money. Then you hire all your smart friends.
Yeah, we did.
There you go. Isn't that what Next Stevie did?
I think there are several companies that are sort of heavily funded from the China side.
Yeah.
But also a mix of, at least from our case, we have Sequoia and we have other bigger funds in the game. But definitely that helps. But I would actually say, even XTV, that we are doing both an electric car, an autonomous, and a whole car, we're not going to build the whole stack. And there's a lot of opportunity of, every company has to pick what's their core competency, what's their differentiator, and not spend effort on other things. And that's where others might find value in commoditizing those things or creating services that come into this ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the hard way is to decide that you're going to be the one next company that actually, figures out how to be another car company and raise billions of dollars to get there. But, don't get dismayed. There are thousands of wonderful, more manageable sized problems that need to be solved. This is an open playground for a million different things. I'm seeing tons of mapping things, tons of sensing things, tons of deep learning and AI things. Think about this broadly. A lot of this stuff doesn't get developed for the car. First, it gets developed either for the military, it gets developed for farming, gets developed for mining, gets developed for the warehouse and robotics. And then once it's cost reduced, much more mature, much more established, then it can come into the car and go through validation and testing. So I think, look broadly at this sector, and there's a million problems that need your IQ points.
Well, and I think that's a great point, because if you're solely focused on being, a component in a vehicle, you do tend to suffer that product development life cycle of the large automotive company, and that is often at odds with the life cycle that venture capitalists look at their investments with. So VCs want to see relatively quick step-ups in valuation, progress with customers and exits. And sometimes that timeline and life cycle doesn't gel with the product planning and OEM life cycle for the automotive industry. So, when you look at the space, I think you should also think about what opportunities you have that are also adjacent in the industry. Mark brought this up a little earlier in the panel, looking for opportunities that might be adjacent, new business models, industries that are impacted by self-driving cars or some of these new technologies. One of our investments, for example, is a company called SwiftMile, and they took a different tack and strategy to solve the last mile problem of commutes by building off-grid solar power charging stations and electric bike rideshare networks. And they just closed a financing round recently and are off to a great start. But they're trying to tackle something that they can actually control and deliver and bring to market independent of the rest of the ecosystem. So, there are ways to create novel business models and opportunities that are adjacent to the core but still add value in the ecosystem. Chris or Igal, do you guys want to add to this at all?
I would just say stay foolish and think about it as transportation and not cars.
Exactly.
There you go.
And our CEO, Padma, calls it's a robot that looks like a car, what we're building. It's not really a car anymore.
Well, thank you all for coming out today and listening to us blow some hot air. And hopefully, if you have any other questions, I'm sure the panelists would be happy to spend some time with you during the breaks. Thank you.